another edition of Drugs, Crime, and Politics, brought to you by the Drug Policy Forum of Texas. Good evening. I'm your host, Buford Terrell, and with me is our co-host.
Good evening. I'm Bindu Nair.
Okay. And, excuse me. Tonight, we will be talking about issues involving mainly medical marijuana, but first, what's in the news tonight?
Well, I'm glad you asked. Like I was saying before, we're kind of in the middle of, we're in a slow time, well, as far as legislation goes. We're kind of in the middle of between elections and when the actual legislative push goes. But an interesting study came out, a Swiss study reported in the November issue of Archives of Pediatrics and Adolescent Medicine, that teenagers who smoke just marijuana seem to be better adjusted than teenagers who smoke tobacco as well as pot, or also compared favorably as opposed to those who are complete abstainers. They were more likely to attend high school, play sports, and have good relationships with friends. This is an interesting article, and completely anti what any OMDCP or the DEA would say about the amotivational smoker, or the commercials that have been applied all across televisions of kids who would run over kids in drive-throughs, or just be the complete amotivational. And then another is the HEA Act, but I guess we'll get back to that because we have Dean on the phone.
Okay. And yes, we're joined by Dean Becker, who will bring us up to date on what's happening in the world. Hello, Dean, are you there? Well, I guess we've lost Dean for the moment. So.
Yeah. Well, let's see if we can get him back on the line. Okay. And in the meantime, some legislative action that you can help with and that you can work on. The HEA is once again being voted on in the House pretty soon. In fact,
and the HEA means what?
Soon enough as this week. It's the Higher Education Act, and this is a bill that would restore financial aid to students with drug convictions. The website where you can call is schoolsnotprisons.com. The Higher Education Reauthorization Act will be introduced in the House Education and Labor Committee and is expected to move to the House floor pretty shortly. So please call your representatives, call and let them know what you think. Definitely let them know that you believe that students who are trying to go back to school and trying to make a difference in their lives, they shouldn't be reprimanded twicely or three times for a crime that they've already paid for. It's denying financial aid for college does nothing to deter drug use in schools and only causes potentially more drug abuse. So once again, the website is schoolsnotprisons.com.
I'd like to add at least one more little event. We had a toy recall, a toy called aqua beads, which are round plastic pellets that can be put together in designs. Water is added and a coating on the beads then fuses them together into a solid. The problem is that the particular solvent on this batch of aqua beads happened to be a chemical that, when swallowed and mixed with stomach acid, turned into gamma hydroxybutyrate, GHB, which is otherwise known as a date rape drug. It's one of the sedatives that gives people a high, but in even reasonable dosage can cause unconsciousness, loss of memory, and in many cases even death. So I think what I want to say about this, as much as anything, is if Congress and the state legislatures, with their scheduling, try to list all of the chemicals in the world that can cause unpleasant psychological effects, they've got a long, hard, difficult job ahead of them. There aren't just a few bad drugs out there. There are a bunch of things that people can use. And until we start focusing on users rather than chemicals, we're going to have problems. Our guest tonight, Noelle Davis, who is a marijuana policy consultant. We hope, among other things, to talk about some of the issues that might come up in the next session of the Texas legislature, and we'll see where it goes from there. And once again, I want to encourage all of you to call in with your comments or questions. Well, good to have you back, Noelle. How are things going?
Thank you. Things are going pretty well. I'm now, as you said, consulting on marijuana policy issues. I'm currently working directly with the Marijuana Policy Project.
Okay.
They're based in Washington, D.C.
Tell us a little bit about who MPP is.
MPP is a national group working on marijuana policy reform, and their main efforts focus on medical marijuana, and then also more in the future working to make sure marijuana is taxed and regulated like alcohol.
Okay.
But the number one focus, the thing they care most about is providing safe access to patients who use marijuana when they have a doctor's recommendation.
Okay. Now, in the last round of legislative sessions around the country, we had New Mexico adopting medical marijuana, and I can't remember whether it was Connecticut or Rhode Island where the legislature passed it, but the governor vetoed it.
Connecticut. Because Rhode Island has medical marijuana.
Yes, that does. And here in Texas, it looked like we had a favorable legislative atmosphere, but one committee chairman blocked it from ever coming to a vote.
That is very correct. I was, at that time, directing Texans for Medical Marijuana, and we had a bill that would provide people with an affirmative defense to prosecution if they had a doctor's recommendation. So people would still have been arrested, but then they would at least be able to explain to a judge and jury why they were using the marijuana, because currently people can't even explain why unless the judge grants them special permission. We had Elliot Neistat as the author of the bill. He's a Democrat from Austin. And then we were fortunate to get Garnett Coleman, also a Democrat from Houston, to sign on as a co-author. And Representative Jim Jackson, he's a Republican from Carrollton up near Dallas. And he was a wonderful surprise because he's extremely conservative, and this just isn't something that I thought he would go for, but it turned out he has a family member who has been affected by this, so it's personal.
Well, I think this has been the thing that seemed to me watching through the years is that this is an issue that really has to become a personal issue for it to be effective in creating change.
Yes, I agree. Most people who sign on to this kind of legislation do have some personal experience. They know someone who's been touched. But it appears Diane DeLisi, the chair of the Public Health Committee, even though she is the chair of the Public Health Committee and has probably met many people with serious illnesses, I can only speculate as to why. She would never tell us why, other than she just was not even going to let it come before her committee.
Right.
Well, as an outside observer, I can impute reasoning to her in that she personally is an extremely conservative fundamentalist, and she comes from one of the most fundamentalist districts in the state. So she was very strictly observing where her bread is buttered.
Well, and actually, she's not running for re-election.
That's good.
It is.
Yeah.
It's the one thing we can take consolation in.
Well,
I won't be the chairman of that committee anymore.
I was going to ask a couple of questions there. And these are some things that I don't know anything about. And the first is, how are the Texas House rules determined? I mean, is there any reasonable chance of affecting a change of rules to keep the chairman from having dictatorial powers?
I doubt it.
Okay.
They like having dictatorial powers.
Yes, they do.
And the people who are usually assigned chairs of committees often are in good with the Speaker of the House. And I think Tom Creddick is, I again, am just speculating, but I would be surprised if he's not the Speaker again next session, although there are lots of people trying to dethrone him. He's quite powerful.
There's a lot of unrest there, but I think you're right that he's already got the power in his hands and is not going to give it up easily.
And I doubt those chairs would either, and there's tradition there. They set the rules every year at the beginning of the session.
Okay.
But most of them remain the same.
Right. It just seems so unfair that one person, the chairman, had such a dictatorial power over that bill when wasn't it that most of the members of the Public Health Committee agreed with this specific piece of legislation? I don't know. It was at least, there were, if not the majority, near the majority. And but they didn't have to make a decision on it because it wasn't going to come up. But you know, we can hope next session. Actually, Jim Jackson was on the Public Health Committee, and hopefully, maybe he could be chair.
Oh, it's time for us to take a break, so we will take a short break and see you again in a couple of minutes.
Okay, maybe a little of the money I spend on marijuana supports terror and violence.
Right.
And that's because marijuana is illegal.
Exactly.
When I buy a beer, that doesn't support terror because beer is legal, right?
Now you've got it.
So what you're saying is if we make marijuana legal and regulate it like beer, that wouldn't support violence.
Did I say that?
Well, we've got the telephone fixed and have our friend Dean Becker with us. Good evening, Dean. Do you have anything interesting for us tonight?
Well, I hope I do. Hi, Buford, Bindu, and Noelle. Good to see you back in Houston. Yeah, there are many things I'd like to share. I understand Noelle's here to try to encourage people to get involved, to look at what's in front of our eyes in regards to marijuana in particular, and how they can do their part to help bring about changes. I want to talk about a couple of my recent programs on the Drug Truth Network, KPFT in Houston, 90.1 FM. Just yesterday, we had Jerry Epstein, founding member of the Drug Policy Forum of Texas, on, and we were talking about that need for involvement. And the folks can tune into that by checking out the website, which is drugtruth.net. Today I had Karen Garrison. She's a lady who had two sons sentenced to 15 and 19 years, mandatory minimums under federal guidelines. And again, this was a separate subject. They were convicted of conspiracy regarding cocaine. But it involves the need for people to stand up for their principles, to look at what's going on in front of them, and to help make the necessary changes. A couple of other items I'd like to contribute to the conversation is the fact that I went to Los Angeles just over a month ago, and while I was out there, the Drug Enforcement Administration raided a cannabis dispensary, and they hauled off all the marijuana, cleaned out the cash register, and left. No charges were levied, and it just shows that there is no rationale behind this. It is nothing more than an attempt to frighten the people into accepting this eternal war on those who choose to use cannabis as a medicine or for recreation or for any purpose, really. It's the one drug that's never killed anybody. And also on my my YouTube website, which is youtube.com/FDBecker, there are something over a dozen videos featuring Rob Campia, the director of the Marijuana Policy Project, We have a video with Mr. Phil Smith of the Stop the Drug War organization, Dr. Rick Doblin from the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. We have an interview with Irv Rosenfeld. He's one of the 5 surviving patients who are provided with medical marijuana by the U.S. government. They give him 300 joints a month, and then they refuse. They want to arrest everyone else in America for using the same product. Folks may have heard of Rick Steves. He's the noted travel writer, and he has come out in favor of marijuana. In fact, he calls himself a church-going, child-rearing pot smoker. We have another video there at YouTube/FD Becker featuring Rebecca Saltzman of Americans for Safe Access, talking about how things are going in California. There's another interview with James Anthony, an attorney out there, former prosecutor, talking about how they have set up legal dispensaries in California, how it's not a problem for the state or the city or the county of Los Angeles. It's only a problem with the Drug Enforcement Administration. And I think that's what Noelle's here to talk about, is the fact that by working together, by standing together, we can make a difference, and I hope folks would closely and do their part to participate in making these necessary changes. Want to recommend folks tune into my shows, which are available Monday through Friday on KPFT. That's 90.1 FM. That's at 4:20 p.m., 420 Drug War News. On Tuesdays, we do the Century of Lies show at 11:30 a.m., and on Wednesdays at 11:30 a.m., we do the Cultural Baggage show. There is no justification for this drug war, and it is necessary to stand up, and I appreciate y'all's efforts.
Thank you, Dean. And before you go, I want to ask you and Noelle a question that just came to me. We've got a brand new Attorney General who is a former federal judge, which means he has to have been in a lot of drug law cases over his career. Do either of you see his having any particular effect one way or another on federal enforcement in his, I hope, short tenure as Attorney General?
If you'll allow me to start here, I think his experience should have taught him that it is time for a change. Just as I said, it's glaringly obvious to most of us. But by virtue of the fact that he hemmed and hawed and hedged about the torture aspect, the waterboarding, I don't know if we can expect too much from him.
Thank you, Dean.
I think that's fair.
It's just like DeLisi. She's probably seen so many people, and they should know. But I hate to just boil it down to he was Bush's appointee, so he's probably going to follow the same rules as the guy who appointed him.
Part I was thinking is that the Sentencing Commission, which is primarily federal judges, just did a minor step toward rationalizing the disparities between the two forms of cocaine sentencing. And I'm not sure that even the most ardent ideological conservative can sit through 20 years or longer on the federal bench without getting some sort of idea that the drug laws are screwed up.
One would hope.
I think I'm the only optimist in the room tonight.
Well, I agree that they probably know that they're screwed up, but whether they have the moral courage to do anything about it is sadly a whole other question.
Speaking of optimism, what we were talking about before the break is the legislation that has gone in Texas for medical marijuana. And you were speaking about the previous bill, which was an affirmative defense. What other types of medical marijuana bills or amendments have gone up in Texas legislation, whether in the House or...
Well, in Texas, bills have only been filed in the House, and there was one filed. The first one was in the 2001 session. The Texas legislature only meets every other year. So there was one filed in the 2001 session, again in 2005, and then this one in 2007. And they've all been pretty much the same. They've all been the affirmative defense.
Okay.
I worked to get a true medical marijuana bill introduced and came against so many roadblocks that just didn't happen. So, but I've also talked to a number of patients who they're okay with just the affirmative defense at this stage.
You know, as someone who's watched the law part of it pretty closely, I don't think that makes too much difference. In that, as soon as the word gets around to the street cop, he's not going to waste his time, particularly on cases he's not going to win. So if juries recognize the affirmative defense, the cops are going to treat it as if it were a true exemption.
But does it really matter to the cop whether the case wins or not? He's looking for his short-term goal of the arrest in the first place.
It matters a little to him. And part of it, and this comes in the 20-plus years I was at the law school. All of our security guards there were off-duty policemen, and through them I got to know several other Houston police. And even though they're not members of LEAP, if you talk to a lot of street-level cops off the record, they will admit to you that, especially when it comes to marijuana, the drug laws don't do any good, they don't work, they're a joke. They kind of shrug and say, well, what the hell, we've got to do our job, we can't do anything about it. So, yeah, there are some out there that use it as an harassment for people that give them a hard time. But most of them, I think, when it comes to marijuana at least, are just going through the motions anyway. So,
Well, I wonder about that. I really do, because I've spoken to many heads of police unions and people high up in the Department of Public Safety, Narcotics Division, and I get the same message. Well, yes, ultimately I agree with you, but my members will never do that. So they think that the cops on the beat.
Well, that's why
it's like they can put it off on each
I'm
other.
stressing talking to
Communication.
street cops under conditions where they are truly off the record are probably going to tell me something different from what they report up the hierarchy.
Or what they say to their union.
Yes, to their union or to their supervisor. I had another question about the Texas legislation. And it's a place, once again, where I think I'm trying to juggle the rules of the legislature. On the surface, this looked like the proper committee to send the bill to. But arguably, it could have gone to one of the criminal justice committees. How has the committee assignment determined in Austin? Speaker's whim?
The Speaker of the House. He has the final say, or he or she.
Yeah.
But usually, if a chairperson asks for a bill to go to their committee, then they'll get it. And I believe she asked for that one to go to her committee so that she could kill it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So yes, and then we tried to get it moved, actually. We tried to get it moved to the Criminal Jurisprudence Committee, where it had been previously in 2005 and 2001, but that was denied.
Yeah, and I believe I'm correct. That's the committee that carried through the Article 2391 that allowed for citations rather than arrests. But so far, Harris County doesn't seem interested in putting that into effect.
Yeah, it's a shame, because it would really, at least at the point of arrest, possibly stop people from having that moment, from having to go to jail, and free officers to deal with real criminals.
Yeah.
Right, and especially for Houston, the overcrowding problem.
If you look at big city police departments around the country, all of them are struggling to try to get enough police on the streets to get the job done. And the numbers I've seen would indicate that every 4 marijuana stops that are handled by citation instead of arrest would be the equivalent of providing one more full-time patrol officer. So it could make a significant difference.
I agree.
And here's a political question for both of you. As someone with interested in the educational aspects and as someone looking at the policy. In recent times, the federal Congress has done two things. First, in a rather sweeping reenactment of the aid to education bill, they loosened some of the constraints on federal aid in relation to drugs, and second, on the it's going to be effective unless you tell us to stop. They sat on their hands and did not keep the Sentencing Commission's reforms from going into effect. I'm wondering if this is an indication that are the legislators loosening up as long as they don't have to stand up in public and take the knocks for what they say? Is this something that if we're stealthy enough, legislators might go along? But
if that were the trend, then hopefully we can get them to keep silent enough about legislation to slip ours in, and especially with the medical marijuana reform. But that's just not the case. With sentencing reform, I think it may be kind of.
See, that's what I don't know. Is right now, I think most of us think about all of those nuts in Washington and the nutty nuts in Austin as being gung-ho drug warriors. Stamp it out. We don't want nobody smoking that stuff around me. But I'm wondering if that's really the case, or if there's a bunch of them that are just doing it for camouflage or because they're afraid of voter reaction.
I would say the majority actually would fall in that second category, where they're either afraid, I think that's the number one, or they don't, most of them are not passionate about this. This is not, most of them are not drug warriors. I've had very rational conversations with many state legislators, and it's a fear of voters, it's a fear of not being perceived as tough on crime. And even though I can show them polling, even though I can tell them all sorts of things, they have a vision, and I've heard the same thing from a number of them, that they can just see the TV commercial. And the TV commercial, even if it's just for medical marijuana, the TV commercial would say, he voted to legalize marijuana. And so that's
the M word, almost.
It's the M word. And, well, not almost. I've also been told that, but can't you call it something else? You have to call it marijuana.
Well, and it's, exactly.
Well, a lot of people have gone the cannabis route for that very reason.
Yes, and I think that's something that folks who are working in drug policy reform ought to continue to consider, and if the funds can be raised, do some focus groups on language, because people are moved by language. People get sold products by language. So.
Well, I know, looking at some of the polling data, we have around 70% of the population in general that seem to be in favor of marijuana. It looks to me like what we've got is really a communication disconnect between the people and the legislature. They're trying to get me to take another break, so why don't we take a break and talk about that when we come back.
Okay.
It's time to play Name That Drug by its side effects. Confusion, anxiety, fatigue, tingling in the fingers, blurred vision, loss of consciousness, excessive phlegm, brown urine, unusual bleeding, nausea, and vomiting. Time's up. The answer, glipizide for diabetics.
This week in drug war history, November 18th, 1986. A U.S. federal grand jury in Miami releases the indictment of the Medellin cartel under the RICO statute. The indictment names them as the largest cocaine smuggling organization in the world. November 19th, 1993. A DEA helicopter crashes while conducting surveillance of suspected drug activity, killing a St. Louis police officer and hospitalizing the pilot in critical condition. November 20th, 1982. legal medical marijuana patient Irvin Rosenfeld begins receiving a monthly tin of about 300 pre-rolled medical marijuana cigarettes from the United States government under the Compassionate Investigative New Drug Program. November 22, 1975. Colombian police seized 600 kilos from a small plane at the Cali airport. In response, drug traffickers begin a vendetta known as the Medellin Massacre. November 23, 1919. Mescaline is first isolated and identified by Dr. Arthur Hefter. November 24, 1976. Federal Judge James Washington rules that Robert Randall's use of marijuana constitutes a medical necessity. This is Steve Nolan for the Drug Truth Network.
Okay, before we broke, I'd kind of ask, what can we do to make the connect between what legislators think and what the voters seem to believe?
Yeah, I feel in particular with, drug policy in general, but medical marijuana being my main focus, and I've been working on this for a few years now, almost everyone I run across supports it. But they also have a deep fear of expressing that support. So there's a lot of fear and shame tied up with this, which shame is a very powerful tool.
Yes.
And, we've all been taught, Bindu and I, at least we're taught to just say no and to not talk about this. So getting past that fear, helping people understand that there are simple ways to communicate with their representatives. Also, another part, a lot of people don't know who their representatives are. And there's just an intimidation. Government, it seems so big. Where do you begin? But,
If I may interrupt, and unfortunately I don't remember the details, but you can go to the Texas State governmental website, and by putting in, I believe it's your zip code, they'll give you a list of who your representatives are.
Yes, you need to put your street address also.
Street address.
Street address and zip code, because the lines are drawn, they're not drawn.
Right, by zip code, exactly.
By zip code.
Yeah. Okay, anyway, that was just an interruption, but go ahead.
Well, yeah, just government feels very big to people. Where do you fit in? It did to me until I got active almost 7 years ago now. Wow. But until that time, I had done absolutely nothing politically besides vote, but it just felt too big. But just one action can start you feeling comfortable.
Something we continually talk about on this show is that it does seem like a huge government that you're not a part of. But these people are the ones that you do vote for, and essentially they work for you. So they're just, another person, another face.
And if I might, occasionally they need to be reminded that they work for you and you can fire them.
And we pay their salary as well.
Well, what's MPP doing these days?
Well, the Marijuana Policy Project is very active. They have campaigns going in, I'll talk about my work in a second, but I would like to talk about, just take a moment, also talk about what they're doing nationally. There's going to be, if they get the signatures, there will be an initiative on the ballot in Michigan and in Arizona in the fall, which, for those people who may be not familiar with the initiative and referendum process, some states, Texas is not one of them, but some states will allow the voters to put a question on the ballot, the same ballot that you vote for your elected representatives, if you can collect a large number of signatures saying from people who say they agree with that item to be on the ballot. And so it's looking like MPP is going to get medical marijuana on the ballot in Michigan in 2008 and Arizona.
Of the 13 states with medical marijuana, the majority of them have done it through initiative, haven't they?
Yes. But there are still, several were through the state, but as of now, yes, the majority is initiative, and hopefully these will be successful and that majority will hold. But in terms of what I'm working on with MPP, I am consulting with them on a project to try to help increase the number of Congress people who vote in favor of what's called the Hinchey Rohrabacher Amendment. That's quite a mouthful, I know. But Representatives Hinchey and Rohrabacher, two gentlemen, one from California, one from New York, one a Democrat, one a Republican, co-author this amendment. They've done it for the past 4 or 5 years. And what it would essentially do, it's very simple, it's beautiful. It would strip the Justice Department of their ability to fund the DEA to go in and conduct raids in the states that have passed medical marijuana laws. So if a state passes a medical marijuana law, and then the Hinchey Amendment was part of our law, the state would be safe. Because as it stands now, California and the other states that have these laws, people are protected under state law, but not under federal law. And so the raids you were talking about earlier, or Dean was talking about, those happen because the government continues to fund them. But if the Hinchey Amendment would pass, it's very simple. It would just strip that funding ability.
Well, now last year, I can't remember exactly, but the amendment got a substantial number of votes in the House, didn't it?
This past summer was the last vote, July 25th, and there were 165 votes in favor. But obviously more than 218, I think, opposed.
220, 230.
Yeah, well, a flat-out majority of the House is, what, about 217 or 18 now?
The number is continually increasing, so the more support that they can get. Every year the number increases. I think within the last 2 years it was only by about 5 to 10, but then there were so many that weren't voting, that were voting in the previous year.
Yeah, and sadly there were several this past year who had voted for it in previous years and voted against it this year. So I don't know if the House leadership was playing games and didn't want it to pass this session.
Pelosi has previously agreed with it, and she's voted for it, right?
It may simply be that the House leadership this year had too many other more important things on their plate. I mean, if you look at what the war in Iraq has been doing to what goes on in Congress, I'm really surprised they've had time to do anything.
Yeah, and I really strongly suspect that, yes, Pelosi has said she would support it if we can get enough votes. But there's a part of me that just feels like leadership said, okay, you and you, don't vote for it this time. We don't want to have to deal with it yet.
Oh, wow.
So what my job is to try to get people power moving. Mm-hmm. And in Houston, there are 7 congressmen, well, 1 congresswoman, who represent the Harris County area, and only 2 of them have voted in favor of the Hinchey Amendment. So we're going to be having a meeting, MPP with Houston Normal, tomorrow evening at 7:30 at the West Gray Cafe. That's 415 West Gray Street, I believe. Mm-hmm. So, for folks watching, if you'd like to come, please do. It'll be a great chance to learn different ways that you can help to influence these members of Congress, putting some pressure on them.
I want to speak like a very, very cynical lawyer here for a minute.
Go for it.
And what I've noticed particularly in California is that as medical marijuana has picked up its pace in California, what the DEA has done has to put their pressure on the distribution system. And with the referendum approach that the states have taken, and even the ones that have, more recent ones, the stress has been on marijuana in the hands of the patients.
Mm-hmm. People growing their own.
Right. And frankly, the one time I ever tried to grow a plant of any kind, I killed it, and it's one I picked out because anybody's supposed to be able to grow it. And if you're faced with cancer, you don't have 60 days to wait for a plant to mature. But I'm wondering, and I don't see Hinchey doing anything to push the protection up the distribution chain. And the weakness I see is that the DEA's been coming in California and treating the distribution chain, which doesn't really fit the definition of caretaker under the California law very well, treating them as commercial marijuana drug dealers. And I'm wondering what kind of effort is going into rewording the statutes or expanding the statutes so that at least the state umbrella covers the entire distribution chain.
That's a great question and a good point. I agree. Ultimately, patients shouldn't have to be left to grow it themselves. And New Mexico attempted to address...
Right. They actually, in their statute, required state officials to grow and distribute, and not wanting to go to federal prison, the state officials balked.
Right. And it's not even that... My understanding of the law was that the state officials don't have to be the ones to grow it, but they have to...
Supervise.
Right. They have to find a distributor.
We have a caller, I believe. Hello, caller. You're on the air.
Oh, yes, I have a question. What needs to be changed to allow people to actually see the perspective of what marijuana can do and actual understanding of the world, actually, just to, how do I describe it, to properly see the attributes and what it does. I'll let you hang up, so I'll let you answer the question.
Okay, thank you.
What needs to change so that people can see the attributes? Again, I feel that the main thing blocking progress on this is the shame associated with it. But I feel like that's starting to change in California more and more. They just keep fighting. More people are coming out in support of it. More celebrities are starting to... And I look at it sometimes similar to the AIDS issue. And AIDS was also very shamed when it was first a big issue. But it picked up steam a lot faster than this is. But I think working past that is one of the main things.
Well, I've got a question there, and I want to make a comment or two about it. I know recently the mainstream press picked up a lot when Montel Williams came out in favor of medical marijuana as a medical marijuana user. There was quite a bit of a stir this last month when Drew Carey came out. Is there any effort to get more celebrity endorsements? I mean, let's face it, one guest on Oprah for 10 minutes is more than almost any kind of publicity.
I dream of that about once a week. Yes, there is an effort. The Marijuana Policy Project has a campaign, their VIP campaign. Yeah. They have someone in California who her job is to try and get more celebrity involvement. Yeah. And we all dream of that, getting that time on Oprah, but we're not there yet. But that would be a huge way to help break this cycle of shame and silence on this issue.
Right, even just talking about it openly kind of makes a big difference. Montel Williams has, Rick Steves, as Dean mentioned.
Yeah.
So I guess let's go ahead and take a caller.
We've got another caller. Caller, you're on the air.
Hi, guys. How y'all doing tonight?
Pretty good.
Good. I'm Troy with Montrose Patient Advocates, and I'll probably call in about once a week and ask a question on the board. But tonight I wanted to make a comment to you guys.
Okay.
You all have very valid answers and solutions to the medical marijuana. I'm actually a patient advocate here in Houston, and I help people that cannot find monies to buy their health insurances for their drugs. And I really think the bigger issue for everyone to really think about is not the shame behind the medical marijuana or that society has to adapt to what's going on, because as you all are aware of, 10 years from now, it probably won't be a big issue like HIV was 20 years ago and how the acceptance is nowadays. But the point I wanted to make is I see patients every day that cannot afford drug coverage. If they would have to lead to this avenue to get help for their medical care is what we really need to think about and concentrate on, because there's so many people that turn to other situations to get relief with pain, like, unfortunately, cocaine, heroin, pot, those kind of things. And I think really if we had more socialized medications and products for people out there, and maybe that wasn't the right wording, but...
Okay. I I think we see your point here, and
They need to be able to have it to where it's easier for people to get relief when they're in chronic pain.
yes,
And if that was the case, people wouldn't turn to drugs or drugs of choice to resolve this problem. Do y'all see what I'm saying?
yes, sir, we do.
Because really, if we had better services, and the point about California a while ago, as far as legalizing marijuana, there are so many more programs for people to get assistance with medical in California versus Texas. You would be amazed at how it is. And also, in Europe, in Amsterdam, and in England, where pot is legal, they don't think twice about it, and they can have up to so many ounces.
Well, it's not quite legal there, but we get your point. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd hate to have him get me started on the subject of health care reform in general. But I think we do need to point out that medical marijuana is much, much broader than simply pain relief. But
He has a valid point that there are certain types of pain that can't be alleviated by morphine or any type of morphine derivative. And so that's what people need to understand. It's not, it's not for recreation. It doesn't produce that euphoria in certain patients who are in neuropathic pain or other types of pain states like that. But then he was, mentioned upon, there's so many different types of illnesses that are helped by medical marijuana.
okay, we have another caller. Caller, you're on the air.
Yes, I'd like to ask, how much is this war on drugs costing us to have a lot of crime?
Okay.
Can I hang up now?
Yes, thank you, sir.
Thank you. That was a great question.
How much does the war on drugs? It's hard to say because the last several years they have dispersed the budget figures, but a conservative estimate would be that direct enforcement costs, money actually spent by government entities for police, for courts, for jails, for that kind of thing, is at least $30 to $40 billion a year.
I was going to say 40.
The standard figure you see is $40 billion, but when you factor in the amount of police that are losing time on the streets picking up minor offenses such as marijuana offenses, and where they could be using it anywhere else for criminal activity or anything like that, the amount of prisons that are being overcrowded, the amount of prisoners that we have to imprison per year, which is something like $28,000 a year. That's a teacher's salary right there. So the extensive costs of the war on drugs are so much greater than $40 billion, and hopefully, the government and everyone else will be able to realize that, this isn't just something that's costing a lot of taxpayer money.
Well, don't forget other things, like every person that's sent to prison for marijuana is someone who is not holding down a productive job and therefore not paying taxes, who may have left children that become wards of the state in one way or another, and tax money goes for them. And if you look at one simple fact, I'm still going to stick to my figures that legal marijuana would cost about $1 an ounce as opposed to the $100 an ounce that's just an awful lot of money being siphoned out of people's pockets. So I would conservatively say that if you add the indirect cost and everything else up, $100 billion a year would not be an excessive figure.
Wouldn't surprise me.
It's time to go to another break. We'll see you in another minute or so.
Hi, I'm Dean Becker of the Drug Truth Network, and you're watching Drugs, Crime, and Politics.
I'm Marcia Rosenbaum, and I direct the San Francisco office of the Drug Policy Alliance. Now, I want to ask you young people a question. Have your parents had the drug talk with you? If they have, I hope it's been productive. If not, I would suggest that you open up the drug talk with them. It's a very, very important talk. And we at the Drug Policy Alliance, through the Safety First Project, have materials that can help you open up the drug talk with your parents. and particularly a brand new booklet called Safety First, a reality-based approach to teens and drugs. Now, in this booklet, your parents will get lots of advice from a reality-oriented parent, me, about how to talk to you about drugs. Basically, there's 3 key issues. One is communication. You want to keep this drug talk going for as long as you can, probably for as long as you have a relationship with your parents. It never ends. There's always issues. So communication. Next is honesty. We've got to be honest with each other. You need to be honest with your parents, and they need to be honest with you. The scare tactics about drug use haven't worked. They're counterproductive, and they don't help us to really educate each other. And then, finally, and maybe most important, is you want to have a solid relationship that is based on values that hold safety as ultimately the most important element of your drug talk. Safety is really the bottom line when it comes to how we should handle the issue of alcohol and other drugs. So I urge you, open up the drug talk. If you're a young person, open it up with your parents. If you're a parent, open it up with your kids. Go to www.safetyfirst, and you'll find lots and lots of resources there. And good luck. Thank you.
Welcome back to Drugs, Crime, and Politics. We're here with Noelle Davis, a medical marijuana consultant, who will be here today and tomorrow to advocate for medical marijuana policy in Texas. And where is it that you're going to be tomorrow?
Tomorrow evening, we are going to be hosting a meeting, the Marijuana Policy Project and Houston Normal working together, hosting a meeting at the West Gray Cafe, which I believe is 415 West Gray Street in Houston. And if you'd like to learn more about that, you could sign up on mpp.org to learn about their campaigns across the country and what's going on in Texas. If you sign up for the emails, then you'll be kept up to date.
I want to go back to something we had touched on a little earlier, and this was how much people in general know. And it may simply be that I'm a little bit older than you guys, but I get the feeling that a lot of people are still in the reefer madness stage of knowledge. And I'm wondering, is there any kind of educational effort going on trying to get more information directly pushed into the hands of consumers? I mean, anything from doorknob hangers to public service announcements on TV to anything like this going on around the country?
In the states where, and I can only speak for what MPP is doing, but in the states where they have active campaigns, they do. They do political ads, they do door knockers, they do door-to-door visiting with people. They have canvassers going out, but like the Office of National Drug Control Policy, their budget is hundreds of millions of dollars. Ours in marijuana policy is 5 or 6.
Okay, we have another caller. Caller, you're on the air.
Hello, how are you tonight?
Just fine.
I want to address something about the drug policies and laws in this country and how they seem to feed a bureaucracy of the jail systems and the police systems in this country. It seems like things are set up so that these systems are constantly fed with money based on drug laws that have really no bearing on what's going on in society. Does that make any sense?
I think that makes a lot of sense. And one thing that's interesting to me, it's almost like the body count thing from the old Vietnam War, that every year the police report on how many tons of marijuana they've seized and how many people they've arrested, and they get enough money for that. But if you look, that number stays the same, and it has stayed the same for about 30 years. They arrest just enough people to keep the system going just enough so that they stay on top of it.
Well, they get a lot of asset forfeiture.
Yeah.
They make money off of taking people's homes, people's property.
Right. Before we close tonight, I wanted to say a couple of words about the recent Harris County bond election in which the voters refused to fund over $200 million for new county jails.
Okay.
According to the newspapers, the leaders of county government were amazed that people weren't willing to give them the money for the jail. I think they've got some serious questions to answer before many people are willing to trust them with money. The first is, for several years, they have been in continual trouble with the Texas jail accreditation people because they have not had adequate staffing in the jail. What assurance can they give us that they can find even more staffing and the ongoing money to pay for it in a larger jail? Second, there have been a lot of complaints and stories lately about the inadequacy of medical care for inmates and even the physical safety of inmates. Don't you think they should show us that they can take care of the prisoners they have now before we give them more? Third, overcrowding. So far, the committee has failed to act to put into place Article 2391 that was passed by the legislature that would allow citations to be used for nonviolent misdemeanors like marijuana protection instead of pretrial detention. How many drug possession cases are in the jail on pretrial detention now needlessly? Likewise, how many people are in jail pretrial for failure to make bond that could be released on a lower bond or personal recognizance? How many people are in the jail for mere technical violations of probation or parole, like failure to meet one meeting with a probation or parole officer? Show us that you've reduced the jail population to the minimum now, and then we'll see if you need additional beds. But so far, the county doesn't seem to have shown they can adequately manage the jail we've got now. Let's make a difference. Any last comments before we leave?
I'd just like to plug our meeting one more time, and I forgot the last time to give the time.
Okay.
The meeting tomorrow night with the Marijuana Policy Project and Houston Normal will be at the West Gray Cafe on West Gray Street, 415 West Gray, at 7:30 p.m. And if you'd like to stay involved in the marijuana issue in particular, please go to mpp.org and sign up for email alerts.
Okay. Any last thoughts tonight, Matt?
Thank you so much for listening, and remember that the legislators, they work for you.
Okay. Now, we have enjoyed your calls, your phones, but remember, letters, phone calls are more effective going to your elected representatives. Good night, and thank you.
Policy of drug prohibition is hopeless. It is hopeless. It will never get better. Literally, victory today is being defined as slowing down the pace of defeat.
We ought to listen to science and medicine when it comes to whether marijuana or any other substance has a medical benefit.
The fact that marijuana is the less dangerous drug.
We're going full-blown into a program that has failed and failed every other time we tried it. Please point out one success in 30 years of an eradication program that has stopped drugs from coming in this country. Point out one success, because I reviewed that research years ago.